at this point and hand over to John. John, over to you.
Thanks, Alim. Great introduction, my friend, again. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to be the host of this this presentation tonight, and hopefully it's going to be a bit of learning, a bit of fun. As Alim said, John Mills. I have about 20 plus years in the IT arena, service management area, operations, and then more in the general management side of things. I haven't been in design thinking too long, as in I wouldn't class myself as an expert, but I quickly understood that there were some gaps in the IT market and some things that could be filled by some of the things within that design thinking world. So it kind of merged them both, and I've had quite a few successes through that. I'm a massive advocate for the customer experience and the employee experience, so this just seemed to match, and this gave us the opportunity to kind of merge them both and do a quick presentation about it. So that's what it's about tonight. So I've just put something on there. It's a welcome to country. It's just more about recognizing, let me just put that off. Recognizing, like I said, I'm John Mills, and I'm just going to hand you over to Khalil for a second, just so he can do an introduction on himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Khalil Beku. I'm based out of Dubai. I have around 20 plus years of experience as well. So that kind of tells you my age. So I come mainly from an engineering background, moving into operations recently. I started out in South Africa, then moved to Middle East, right? So I spent a lot of time, mostly from a vendor perspective, and helping customers and IT departments across Middle East, Africa, Europe, and recently also in Asia Pac, pre-COVID, obviously. So lots of experience in service management, lots of experience also in DevOps and CI/CD, and very passionate about design thinking, and especially the power of design thinking solving many of the issues we are experiencing today, both professionally and socially as well. So, and we can talk about that if there's any questions around that. So thank you, John and Alim.
No worries. So how it's going to run, I'm going to turn the video off because the presentation's on my left, so it looks like I'm not looking at you guys when I've got the video back on. So I'll go through a couple of the phases of the presentation, and then I'll turn the video back on and we can have a little bit of a Q&A, and then the video will go back off and I'll carry on, and then Khalil and I will be answering questions through the chat. Alim will be supporting and helping us with that. And we'll get through this session like that. So obviously it's a huge subject and we've only got an hour, and we normally try and hold this to close to 20 minutes from a Q&A perspective, a presentation perspective, and then we have the rest as a Q&A. We'll try and keep as much to that, but I don't want to scrimp on the content because it's really important to give us some context. We are obviously available for these one-on-one sessions. So if this sparks something inside you and you want to have one-on-one sessions, then we're all available via Calendly to have a 45-minute catch-up and go into more detail about anything that you see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick overview of design thinking, a quick overview of what I mean by putting some context around what I mean by IT. Then I'm going to give you this pitch of how I think they can merge and help each other. And then the last one is about the value of with and without design thinking in it. So who's this for? So I think it's for, or I've put this together for anyone who's interested in design thinking. Okay, so I've also put, if you're a CEO or a manager of people and you want to, and you're really passionate about the employee satisfaction, then this is for you. And then also, if you're in the support arena or a technician or an engineer and you just want to be better at the things that you're doing, so that's who this is for, right? So if you're any of these, this is hopefully going to kind of just give you a few aha moments over the next hour. Just going to turn my video off now so I can concentrate on this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is design thinking. It is such a buzzword at the minute, and I think it's a buzzword more around the IT things because people are realizing the benefits of and the value that you can get out of design thinking. So it is quite, everyone says it's a process. It's not really a process. It's an iteration and a cycle of going through things one after the other to try and get to a really human-centered solution. Lots of other industries have been using this for a long time, and there are multiple variations of this because there are multiple solutions to meet. So I've picked one that's kind of generically defines it, and that comes up in these 6 steps. And these 6 steps are, as you can see on the screen, this empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, and then implement. Okay, and this is done in a circle because it is a cycle. So what is it? It's a process for creative problem solving. And the thing that I would really like to highlight here is this human-centered core. So some people call it human-centered design. Some people have called it design thinking. There are lots of different ways that you can slice and dice this. For the purpose of this, we just call it design thinking. So as it says, it encourages organizations to focus on the people side of things. So where it's predominantly inwardly thinking, this is outward. Okay, we're looking at the consumer and the end user and the person that uses these services. We're looking at it from that perspective rather from what a typical IT, in my experience, happens is it's an inward out type scenario. So like I said before, it isn't really a process. It's a series of things that go, that we keep visiting iteratively until we get to the best solution for the customer, and it's something that we can implement and it provides value, and it's around that human-centered side of things. So we continually revisit this and it never stops. Okay, so we think of things like agile and stuff. Okay, so we put it up into these bite-sized chunks and we'll put it in. Think of things like MVPs. Think of minimum viable products where we just get the basics in and then we go back to the person or the group or the team that's actually going to use it and say to them, hey, is this going in the right direction? Is this meeting your needs? So how do I think it can help IT? I think it can help IT by bringing in empathy. So again, in my experience, most things within IT are done from a technology perspective or a technology strategy perspective, and design thinking does things from the what it does for the experience and to the end user side of things. So this is, hey, if you were walking a mile in their shoes, we have multiple examples of delivering the best IT in the world. But if that IT is not what the actual user wants, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so bringing in the design thinking stages brings in this empathy. It's this walk a mile in their shoes. And then when you're supporting them, you actually understand then that they might be out in the middle of the forest somewhere because that's their job, and you saying to them, my God, can you not just do this? Knowing where they are, knowing what they do, knowing how they do it, and knowing how they interact with IT provides that empathy, right? You're not going to ask a certain amount of questions when you have that knowledge in the first place. And the last thing about it is, I said before, design thinking has been around for a long, long time. It hasn't been in IT as much, but it's been in the industry or in other industries for a long, long time. Where I see it coming into IT now is more from a perspective of there are vendors that are using design thinking to create things like service management tool sets. So if you go into ServiceNow, or if any of you know about ServiceNow, they've got a whole department that just looks at the design of ServiceNow from a design thinking perspective. So they go out to companies and they say, what is it that you need? What is it that we're not delivering in our past revisions and things? And they've put it together, they've designed it a lot better. And, you know, if you've looked at the Gartner quadrant, ServiceNow is top right by far. And a lot of other companies are doing this. And like it says on the slide, Apple, Google, Samsung, these are all using these things. It's not a new thing for them. So that's what I mean by design thinking. Okay, so whenever Khalil or I mention this design thinking, I'm going to say process because it's easy to just say it like that. We mean those kind of 6 steps. What I mean by IT, and believe me, this is a very generic summary of IT, is I basically split it up into operations and projects just to simplify it. And I know technology is a lot more complicated than this, but just for the context of this, I've split it up into IT operations and projects. And in your IT operations space, you can obviously see the processes, the workforce. So you know your teams, your ITIL side of things. You know your service management processes, your service desks is all in this space. Your apps teams, your infrastructure teams, your dev teams, they're all in this space. And then when I'm talking about project services, it's the bolt-on bit that's the add-on work. You know, the extra services outside of what we normally term as base services. So that's what I mean by project services. And again, think of that plan, do, check, act, and think of agile and DevOps, bringing those together. So we've already gone through this cycle of bringing operations and projects, or that dev and base together, the dev and operations together. So design thinking goes that one step further than that and says, hey, we can actually bring all 3 groups together and do what a lot of devs have been doing for a long time as well. You know, they go to the customer and say, what is it that you need? Do you want it blue? Do you want it green? Do you want it, you know, big, small? They've been doing parts of this for a while. That DevOps does the kind of bridge between projects and stuff. And my idea is this design thinking, the 2 phases of it that we're going to talk about, just goes a little bit further. So that's what I mean by understanding IT. So Alim, I'm just going to turn the video back on and just pause there for a second, just so I can get a glass of water and just ask if there are any questions.
There are some questions and more may come in. So there are 4 questions that have been posted. And then we can also see if anyone wants to ask a question as well. But I'll just go through the questions that have been posted in the chat for now. Okay, just while you said, catch your breath, have a drink of water. So the first one is, how is design thinking used to evolve a balanced scorecard and enterprise performance management? So design thinking in terms of balanced scorecard and performance management.
Okay, so there's obviously 2 sides of things there. So the balanced scorecard, that tends to be more of a strategic tool, and it tends to be anything that's kind of on there is predetermined. Okay, so my answer to the question is more to do with when design thinking is brought in, and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail in the next part. When design thinking's brought in, you're just a lot closer to the customer. You're going to increase the employee satisfaction, the customer satisfaction, which in turn is then going to have an impact on balanced scorecards. You know, the whatever metrics and things that you're going to put on a balanced scorecard. What was the second one, Alim? Sorry.
It was about
You know,
performance management and balanced scorecard, but
all right.
yeah, you know, you've answered that question, but there are some other questions which I'll go into. Is there a measure of empathy and how it enhances the IT performance? So how do you measure empathy and how is it related to IT performance? Great question, right? So these, I have no idea how to answer them. So
that is a great question.
I'm interested.
That's a great question. So my answer to that is there's leading and lagging indicators for any kind of reporting or any kind of statistic on that, right? So empathy, you couldn't judge. It's subjective to go to say you're more empathetic than someone else, right? Unless one person's a real idiot and the other person's a loving, person, So my answer to that is it's a leading indicator. Okay, so it's things that you are going to find out by implementing these things that I'm just about to talk about empathizing with your customer, about understanding your customer a lot more, which in turn then has an impact on customer satisfaction. Some live examples of that would be, how many times, I'm sure the majority of us on here have heard that, we're so out of touch. Okay, so, or we implement Windows 10. Great. I didn't want Windows 10. I wanted me to be able to sell mortgages faster because that's my job. So Windows 10 for us is a major implementation. For them, it makes no difference. Really, in their day jobs of selling mortgages, if that's their role, it doesn't, right? So if we understand their roles a lot more, which is where design thinking comes in, then we make better decisions on the stuff that we implement. We implement it with a human-centered focus rather than a technology focus. And that in turn has a knock-on effect to our performance measures and SLAs and things and service offerings and stuff.
So if I could just ask you, so that's answered the question, but John, I remember another presentation you did last time around, a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly, where you touched on feelings and happy faces and stuff. So maybe I'm dreaming it, right? Maybe I'm making it up. I'm sure it was you. So I guess some of the measurements could be around feelings. Is that right? And could you measure feelings in terms of how happy your customers are, which may lead, which may revolve around empathy and enhancing IT performance, or not? What's your view there?
So I don't think empathy has ever caused a negative impact. And empathy is something that design thinking brings in, right? So to understand the other person's point of view is a positive natural attribute, right? So when we say smiley faces and things like that, yeah, sure, that could be. Net promoter score is a great thing about customer satisfaction, right? And that is purely, it boils down to one question. If you're outside of the organization, would you recommend me to a friend or not? And the science behind that is, unless you give a 9 or 10, you're not going to do that, which in turn affects business. And empathy is a scientific fact that it helps that user give a 9 or 10. If you give an amazing experience, they're going to give you a 9 or 10, which means they're going to recommend you to a friend or recommend your services to others.
Okay, so I'll move us on, but I know Khalil, you may want to come in on some of these as well. But let me just mention to you, John, so you're aware. So there's some chat, some more text in the chat where Surinder Kaur, who's one of the mentors, has also provided her views, which is very helpful.
Perfect.
And Azar, the person who asked the question, has actually said it's making more sense now. So I think you've answered the question anyway.
Oh, fantastic.
And but he had also said, can I say Gemba is something to help measure empathy or prioritize and fit empathy well, right, in the right place? So I haven't heard of Gemba, Gemba. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but as I said, this person, Azar, is quite happy with the answer as it goes. But have you heard of Gemba?
I haven't, not off the top of my head now.
Okay. All right, so let's move on. So anyway, and some more questions are coming, but let me just cover the ones that had already been asked. So another question is, how do we manage the synergies between design and system thinking, since both have a different approach? One has a bottom-up and the other is top down. So design and system thinking. How do we manage the synergies between those?
Look at another. Do you want to answer that, Khalil?
Yeah, so I think let's wait for the example, the practical example we have close to the end. I think that will maybe answer that question.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. So we'll get.
Great question, though, Alil, and just what I wanted to say on that is, that is an absolute thing with design thinking and systems thinking all the time. And the really big thing about this is, how much time do you spend on this, right? How much time do you spend figuring out about this? Because at the end of the day, the customer wants a solution. So we can talk as much as we want and make pretty pictures and things like that, but they want a solution. So for me, I've found in my experience is getting those teams together and coming to a solution together is a really great way of saying, well, we've both got a human-centered side of things in mind, right? We're doing something for the customer. Without that, we may as well not do it. So if those teams can come together and have that as a focus, it does kind of change the conversation a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And so another question, which I said, this is all new to me, so I'm loving it. So it doesn't make much sense to me, but let me ask it anyway. So is there a place for Rosenberg Marshall system in design thinking when it comes to empathy? So I have no idea what Rosenberg Marshall system is, but if Halil or John or someone else knows, then are you able to answer that? So the question is there a place for Rosenberg Marshall system in design thinking when it comes to empathy?
Look, that's out of my area of expertise, so I don't want to guess or put it. Khalil, do you?
No, I don't know what well, I don't.
So the person that asked that question, look, I'll give you a chance later on in the Q&A section to ask that question verbally and explain. But sorry, we're not able to answer it right now. Let me just move on to the next question. I think there's just two more. How to adapt empathy to an IT support role?
How to adapt. So we will go into this in a little bit more detail. So if we can just pause that one, and then if it's still a question at the end, then I'll answer it directly. But let's get through some of the slides.
Yeah, and one final one, if I may, John and Halil. It's is it fair to say that design thinking brings empathy to the provider and improves customer sentiment as a result? And so therefore, a quick snapshot of empathy is current customer sentiment versus what product provider thinks the customer wants. So a bit of a mouthful there, but is it fair to say that design thinking brings empathy to the provider and improves the customer sentiment? So providers and customers and empathy.
Yeah, and again, that's why I highlighted empathy as that thing, because it was the one thing for me that design thinking brings into that whole process, and it's the one thing that if you put that into anything and everything that you do, not excessive, but if you have that as a focus, if you have that human-centered, that end-user customer focus with the things that you're doing, then of course it increases sentiment. There is nothing better, and I used to work for a company that, the average, they're a managed services provider, and the average was 6 years tops, or 3 + 1 + 1. Right? They're in their 19th year with this customer. So, and that's because they really got to know them. They had a good collaboration. They had, hey, we're going to do this because we know that it makes it really easy for your customers. And they were like, well, why would we change? And that's been going on for a lot longer than a normal managed services provider's contract.
Okay, great. So they're the questions, very useful. The thing that comes to my mind, but we won't stay on it, is personas, and maybe using personas to be able to empathize with your customers, right? And naming a certain person, etc., and their behaviors. But if we can get you to move on then, John.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to talk about them next. Okay. So there's 5 of the design thinking stages, and I want to talk about just the first 2. So we're not going to go through all the way to the end to the solution side and test and prototyping things, because we don't need to do that. But Alan pointed out before that there's a really important thing that comes out of 2 of these processes. The first one being empathize. So again, this is the conducting research, understanding your users, going out and then having those interviews and saying, hey, what is it what you do? How do you interact with IT? Right. The second one is then this define, which is combining all of this research that you've got and then really sitting down and making this. This is the stage as well where we talk about these archetypes or personas. And I'll go into this in more detail. So what I want to do now is I want to pass you on to Khalil, who's going to talk you through a real live example, right? So we've just talked about this design thinking kind of process stages. We've talked about these first 2 that we were, going to talk with the customer, and then we're going to sit down and make some diagrams out of what we've found. Okay, so I'll pass you on to Khalil, and he can go through this.
So thank you, John, for that. So I think the big message of the big kind of place that I want to start off is empathy, right? And when we talk about empathy, we talked about it quite a bit now as well. I think what's important to understand is we as IT are just, kind of stuck in our operation centers, kind of stuck in our data center rooms, in our NOC centers. And the big thing about design thinking is the big message coming out of design thinking, especially around empathy, is get out of the building, right? Get out of wherever you are and speak to the people that's going to use the system or the product or the service. This is important. This is the key, right? You get out there, you understand how they're feeling, what are they thinking, what are they saying about the system that they use, the products that they use, the services that they use, right? And John just briefly touched on that. So the first thing you need to understand is who are the users, right? Who are the users that are using your products and services, and try to create a personal face to that, and that can take the form of a persona. Now, this is a real life example of the education kind of industry, right? And what I tried to do was show you what are the type of personas that you will typically find within the education industry, right? And what's important for each of these different personas from a customer, from a human-centric perspective. Okay. So can you move to the next slide, John? So let's jump into the student persona, right? And try to get a better feeling of what this means. And coming back to, I think, is Azal's question around how does design thinking and systems thinking kind of intersect, if I understood his question correctly. So if we look at the persona, if we go out of the building, as I said, and we look at the persona of the student, we realize that there's different points in the journey of this persona, right? This persona needs to do some enrollment, needs to go through admission, he needs to go through induction and learning, and he needs to also start then figuring out what it takes to start moving or start collaborating with this university, right? Now, to understand and to go, when we go out to the building, as I mentioned, we look at each of the phases or the journey that this persona goes through. What are the steps that it takes at each point from a user perspective, from a human-centered perspective? We don't talk about technology. We don't talk about systems. We don't talk about applications. We purely want to understand what is the user doing, what is the user feeling, what is he thinking, everything, right? And once we've gathered this picture, then we look at, okay, what are the interaction points? What is the channels that this person or this persona is touching from an IT perspective? What are the channels? So I've given some examples here. Let's go through one of them, right? So when a persona enrolls, one of the channels they may interact with is the education portal or the content delivery portal, where it looks at the curriculum, it looks at what options are available. These are channels that interact with IT, right? And I've also shown what the potential back-end process could be. Now, there's one thing I want to highlight that this is not cast in stone. This is 1 or 2 iterations of an example. As you go, as John mentioned earlier, it's an iterative process. So you'll continuously update this map of the persona of the student. Okay, it's always continuing. Now, the important part that I also want to highlight is you can tie this directly to the systems. The question that came up from one of the participants in this meeting was around the system interaction. Right? If you look to the bottom of the screen, I've kind of listed what capabilities are required from an IT perspective that touches upon that step in that journey for that student persona. So you can see the link directly. Right? And you see, and if you just try to spend more time in understanding in each of these steps, you can immediately start empathizing more with the user and immediately start understanding where it is we need to improve within the customer experience lifecycle. That's the key, right? You want to focus on the customer experience lifecycle and then look at it from that perspective and see what IT needs to do to improve the services that it offers towards that persona. John, can you move on, please? So that was the entire life cycle of a student persona. So I'm just taking the one stage or the one phase within that journey, which is the enrollment phase. And just to go into a bit more detail around what that means, right? Now, again, this is a few iterations of just spending some time with some students, right? And coming up with a quick kind of map of what the steps are the student takes and what capabilities are required from an IT perspective. Now, this will continuously improve all the time. Right? This is a living and breathing document, right? It's not something that you do in a point in time and then you discard it. Right? So the student, maybe let's call the student Khalil or John or Alim, right? He's found a perfect educational system, and that's the kind of the first step in this journey, right, of enrollment. He speaks to the education system. He figures out that, the educational institution. He figures out that, okay, I need some information, and they send him a pack, right? They send him information pack so he can understand more about the education institution. He's happy with how he finds. He clicks on the information pack. He starts the enrollment process, and he goes through entire enrollment. I'm not going to go through all the steps here. So he goes through entire enrollment until the application is approved and he's gone through the payment and he's satisfied with the information he received, and that transaction or that journey is completed. For each of these points, you can immediately see the channels. This can translate to IT applications or in this case, education facility applications, right? Which are the back-end processes involved? What's important from a user perspective? What does he want to get out of this, which is the user stories? And which capabilities are required for IT, okay? What you don't see on the slide is each of these points can be individual kind of points where you can go into more depth. So for example, if there are issues around enrollment, right, or the back-end process or one of the channels within enrollment, you could delve into that particular point and see what it is that we need to prove, maybe from a back-end process perspective, from an IT perspective, maybe from a system perspective, maybe the application slowness. So there's many things that can come out of here to provide you a continual service improvement program. I can go into that program now. So that's kind of in a very quickly rough example of the customer journeys and how you can interact or intersect both personas from a human-centered perspective into IT systems. Thank you, John and Alim.
Thanks, Alim. John, over to
No
you.
problems at all. So that is a live example of what I just talked about with this design thinking process and those initial two. As you can see, there's a whole lot of information there, and it can be an exhaustive process. But what I want you to kind of take out of this is, as Khalil mentioned, it's that human-centered side of things. Okay, so the focus on everything that you've seen is the the user experience side. So when we're looking at our IT systems, when we're looking at our things that we can improve, it's to improve that process. It's to improve that journey. Without you going and doing the interviews and figuring out that in the first place, then we're guessing. You know, we're doing a typical IT thing of sitting in a room as an IT group and assuming what the customer wants, instead of actually going and asking the customer or sitting down with the customer or bringing the customer into us and saying, hey, what is it that you want? So that's kind of like the focus on these things. I want to finish off, because I'm conscious of time, I want to finish off just with, this is the ICT, so information communication technology and design thinking, right? So I just want to put some examples together. The two icons are just IT operations and projects. And I want to say, here's some of the things that I think are without design thinking, okay? So we're very much, I feel, and my experience leads me to say that we are very much process orientated. So, you know, we go from an ITIL perspective, we do service management processes, we do the Princes and the Agiles and things like that. We concentrate on ICT satisfaction, okay? So I'm sure most of us have heard of the watermelon effect. We send a report out saying availability is 99.9% and it's all green, but our customers are screaming, right? And because there's a disconnect there. We're very much technology driven, service offerings and agreements. So especially in the managed services provider space, we sit down in a group and we say, this is what we want. And then the managed service provider says, yeah, this is what we can do. And then they sign off and we go, cool, when are we going to start? We'll do transition and then when we go, right? I don't know where the user is actually involved in that process. So we tend to go in and then start providing services with an actual end user, and there's a disconnect there, right? That's because we are SLA and service offerings focused. Again, we're service oriented, and then we do, this last one is solutions based on experience. So this is more from a service desk perspective around the fact that we tend to be really good at this user experience stuff after we've spent a year in the job. So we've talked with our customer for a year, 6 months to a year, and then all of a sudden we go, no, I know what Mary wants, and we get better at that. With design thinking, like we've mentioned, it's human-centered, not process-oriented. We deal with external customer satisfaction, so we ask the customer, hey, is there anything that we can do better? Because we know what questions to ask. It's business strategy driven, because their business could be, like I mentioned before, selling mortgages, right? So we now then go, how can we change our technology to help you sell mortgages better, quicker, more value, that side of stuff. It's outcomes focused, rather than SLA focused. So whole separate conversation just on that. Value driven. So we're providing value, and it's true value, not service level value, true value. And then solutions based on context, as in, okay, so we're phoning a user, we have context about how they interact with IT and what they need, so we provide solutions a lot better to cater for their needs, rather than it be, through experience. And from a project perspective, very quickly, strategy, project, and it's quite transient. We'll bring someone in to put a project together and go. If we've got this design thinking personas and archetypes, half the work that projects do about saying, here's what we're going to put in, is already done. So again, it's based on business strategy. It's a business project, not an IT project, because we're going to say, hey, this is IT helping you sell more mortgages, and it's consistent. So these personas are ever evolving, and they're things that we can give every project. It saves them money, and they have more context for the project that they're going to be delivering. And just some generic ones right at the end are prescriptive versus collaborative, customer relationship, so we can do customer relationship surveys. We even have customer relationship managers. Design thinking, when you sit down and figure out what people are doing, you have a genuine partnership. They go, this trust there, right? They say, they know what I need. And again, employee satisfaction, which is not a bad thing, it's a great thing, and versus customer experience, or added customer experience. So like I said, I'm conscious of time, so I think that is it from a presentation perspective. I will turn the video back on.
Okay. And on that note, if I can ask everyone to turn their videos on, as we said we would do, so would really appreciate you giving us a wave, and I will do a snapshot of you all, if you don't mind joining in, just for 10 seconds, and then it's up to you if you choose to leave your camera on or off. But I really appreciate that. All right, thank you so much all. So now that you played your part, I can ask the questions that we have in the chat. We have 4 outstanding questions from what I can see, and there may be more that come in. But let me, before I ask the questions from the chat, let me just open it up to see if there's anyone who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question directly, or perhaps even if you have a subsequent question on something that's already been asked before. Is there anyone that wants to unmute themselves?
So whilst people are thinking about that, obviously a huge subject. And I'm sorry if I've gone through it really quickly. It was just to give everyone a bit of a taster into where we can see some valuable things that can come out of design thinking process and into IT. Like, I hope it touched some areas of where you kind of can take something and go back. So
maybe I could, John, just jump in as well. I have some questions that came in beforehand. We could I'll take a few and we can go through that while we're waiting for somebody to open up a question. So one of the questions we received was, for example, does design thinking applying for new scenario creations or for improving old scenarios? Right. So design thinking can be used in both perspectives. It can be used to create new services, new products as well, and also for understanding old experiences of services. Right. Remember, it's about the human centeredness. So what is the current experience with an existing service, and how can we improve the experience by understanding or empathizing with the customer or the user? That with regards to new scenarios creations, design thinking is actually the best, I think, a very powerful thing to use, very powerful methodology to use. And the reason why I say it is because one of the key kind of steps in the iteration that John talked about is the prototyping. So as quickly as possible, come out, ideate, empathize, understand the user, build these personas, and come out of the prototype as quickly as possible. Right? The reason why they try to get to that point as quickly as possible is because you want to start not only thinking about the customer and the empathizing, but also, are you building the right thing? So you build something, a prototype, but this can be, a prototype could be just a sketch, a wireframe. It could be cobbling of cardboard boxes together, whatever the prototype may look like, right? Getting it back in front of the user, getting feedback. Are we building the right thing? So to answer that question, yes and yes. Right? Both old scenarios and improvement of development of new products and services as well. Okay. So,
okay, thanks, Halil. Halil, I have, so there may be some others that you want to go through, but there's 5 questions that I think I have in the chat that are still unanswered. So let me just raise some of these, and it'll either be yourself or John taking them up, okay? So, and for everyone else, keep your questions coming if you want. So I've got one here, which is, what roles does the below play in design thinking approach? And the examples they gave, and actually I'll post it in the chat so you can see it as well. Let me just do that. So this will be in the chat because it's quite a long question, you'll see, so you can read it. But essentially, what roles does the below play in design thinking approach? Psychometric research and behavioral studies, positive workplace culture and leaders through team building activities and employee assessments. So what do they play in design thinking approach? Maybe psychometric research in particular, I don't think you've covered, right? Whereas you've covered employee assessments.
Look, I kind of get split here, right? Because you can find out a lot of things, right? But at the end of the day, we're an IT department, and we're delivering services. Some of it's not rocket science, so the bit I wanted to touch on today is just a couple of things within design thinking that are really simple, really just like Khalil said, get off your bum, go and speak to the customer and ask them, spend a day in their shoes. Even that is part of that human-centered thing, and it will help a support model no end. Psychometric testing and stuff, yeah, of course it is. The more information you get about the customer, the better. But because we're service-based, we give services and things, we're not really selling them a product per se. So, going down the psychometric testing and stuff seems a very salesy, commercial thing to do instead of like a service-oriented IT thing. So I wanted to concentrate more on the empathize side of things and spend a day in the shoes rather than that. It doesn't hurt, and if you've got the time, fine. My experience is you will do that. You'll never finish doing that, right? Because there's so many customers you're going to be speaking to and doing. So having the time and the money to do that is quite exhausting.
Okay. And I believe, so again, look, I have some questions from the chat, but I believe Mark Brown wants to ask a question. He's going to unmute himself. So Mark.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity for asking the question. I'll keep it short and brief. Do you have any tips or tricks to help evangelize design thinking in IT environments? Because as a project manager, I've been focused on design thinking, trying to bring design thinking to projects, but it tends to, it's not sticking. And I'm trying to figure out ways to make it stick within the organization so that I'm not reinventing the wheel each time. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark, and great question. I hear you and I empathize with you, because this is absolutely something that happens a lot. My experience is more the collaboration side, right? So the more collaboration you get, the more people you get into that kickoff at the start from the business, from getting users in that can actually give that feedback, the better you got, especially if you've got your key stakeholders in that meeting. So they're hearing from the actual people that are going to be using the product or using the service. That really, really helps. Fun. So there are a lot of processes in that empathize part in design thinking. There are thousands. There's brainstorming sessions, ice-breaking sessions, journey mapping, all that kind of stuff, that you can make that really fun. And you come out of those sessions saying, wow, these guys really, really want to know what I'm doing. And that obviously causes buy-in. I hear where you're coming from, and I've experienced the same. Unfortunately, until you start getting results, people don't tend to buy into the let's go do some design thinking stuff up front. You can be a bit smarter with it, so maybe don't call it design thinking and put people's backs up. Just say, hey, we're going to have a kickoff meeting, but have a brainstorming session, and bring in some of those design thinking strategies, and make it, like I said, make it fun.
Yeah,
it has to be from the top down.
Yeah, so that's that actually answered the question for me anyway. So I'm putting myself in everyone's shoes here. So I can imagine that even if they weren't thinking in the way that Mark was saying, by not calling it design thinking and having a kickoff session, but challenging the status quo, challenging what we are doing to bring in the concepts of design thinking, that's answered it for me. I hope it has for Mark. But Khalil, is there anything else that you want to add to that in terms of how you introduce and embrace and embed design thinking in new projects?
Yeah. So that when I heard that question, I smiled because it resonates a lot with many of my experiences as well. So I fully understand, Mark, where you're coming from. The one thing we do try to do is try to find that one corner of the organization instead of tackling the entire organization. One corner could be a single persona or a very small experience to try testing out or experimenting with these practices and get some wins from that, and then start growing that. And once you do that, then I think you should be able to get some traction. That's my feedback only.
Okay, so I'll move on to another question, but I'll just add one more point, which I hope might help some from my example. So as I mentioned at the start, I knew nothing about design thinking, didn't know what you'd be covering, but what I found is that a lot of it resonates with a course I did, a certified course I did called APMG Change Management. Okay, so APMG Change Management. In that course, there's a lot of the techniques that you've alluded to, such as personas and customer journeys and 360 in the course. So I'm just wondering, in Mark's organization or other similar organizations, perhaps one way of even changing some mindsets is to get people, if possible, to go on some of these courses. So if you had 5-10 people doing change management courses, perhaps that might also help, right? So I guess a variety of techniques. But yeah, so let me just move us on just because of the timing. So another question that's come in is, what are the tools and techniques for problem framing? In building persona, what type of problem framing techniques are recommended?
Look, there are multiple, and it is very, very much dependent on what you're trying to achieve, right? So there is multiple sources for this, where you can either pick up yourself or through your own experience, but it is completely dependent on the outcome that you're trying to get, the industry that you're in, the journey that you're trying to map, the problem that you're trying to identify, the group that you're trying to identify it with, and then one of those processes will resonate. Like I said, there are hundreds to get to that. There are lots of crossovers, as you mentioned, Aline, there with the organizational change things. Of course it is. It's human-centered, right? Organizational change is human-centered. You know, problem solving, even problem management from an ITIL perspective, right? 5 whys, things like that. Those are all things that are, their intent is to get to the root cause of the problem, right? Their intent is to get to the real issue and then basically say, you know, what was your journey to get there? How did you interact with us? And we would like to make that experience better with you, keeping you in mind. So specifics, you know, it's too big a question to answer, but yeah, I hope that kind of answers.
Okay, and Surinder, did you want to jump in? So Surinder's another one of the mentors.
Sorry guys, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. The only one point I was going to make on the back of Mark's earlier question was, with all due respect to John and Callie talking about empathy, 100% agree with what you guys are saying, and it's been an amazing presentation. But the one thing I'm going to say as a designer is also being assertive, because a customer will come and give you 101 things that they would like or they want, they demand. But you as a PM or as a designer, engineer, whatever, I think you have to draw the line somewhere as well and have boundaries. And that's how you get, in my mind, a good design. Otherwise, it can also become something which is completely, you know, customer focused, and it can be lost in translation as well, because you then start developing something that they want and not necessarily something that you should deliver or you would deliver as a client, or you know, in my arena as an integrator. So being assertive is also just as important as being empathic, I think.
It absolutely is, and I just want to add to that as well, right? A really good saying that I got quite early on in my career was, I came into this, the customer is always right, and my manager came up to me and it was like, no, the customer's always relevant, but the customer's not always right. And there is an element of this where we are the experts, right? And they've paid millions of dollars to get the experts in. So be an expert. So an absolutely great point there, Surinder.
So you get paid millions of dollars, John? Was that reference to yourself?
That was past tense.
Just checking. So look, we still have another 5 or 6 questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'm going to try and fit in 2 of the questions that I have remaining. Apologies in advance if I don't get to fit your question in, okay? Sorry. So the first question is, what level of risk tolerance is recommended in design thinking approach? So if you could just talk about risk management, risk tolerance in general, either John or Halil, in terms of design thinking and how you manage risks.
Yeah, I can take that then. So from a risk perspective, again, I normally try get my biggest key stakeholder into those decisions with me, so I can get really like candid with them and work out their risk appetite from the start, because that helps me then when I'm going into other meetings and when I'm going to find out all this information. I can understand if I sit down with a customer and they say, you know, I want a pink $2 million one, I know my key stakeholder is going to be like, that is not happening. You know, when we're not going to go kind of out of the box too much, and I can make that. So again, it's like the problem statement. It all depends on, you know, who you're delivering for and your key stakeholder. In my experience.
Can I just add to that, John? Sorry, I was on mute. One of the ways also that we use design thinking to reduce the amount of risk, and we haven't talked about it much today, which is the prototyping, right? So the more you get and you iterate on the prototype, the better feedback you get from the actual user, and this reduces the amount of risk moving forward. In actually, when you deliver the service or the new service or the new experience, right? So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was important to talk about the prototyping, the piloting. Yep, so that's helpful. Thanks, Halil. So look, one final question, and as I said, sorry if I haven't got to yours, but it's actually two questions which I'll combine into one. So the person asks, what are the 3 top KPIs you've used with design thinking? So, you know, around reporting KPIs. And also a question which is related is there a way to measure maturity level of design thinking in an organization? So any kind of maturity models, as well as reporting on that maturity model or KPIs generally. Who wants to take that? Your experiences around reporting and maturity models. John or Halil?
Yep, I can take that. So I'll very briefly go into the first one, the KPI side of things. For me, is that lagging indicator of the customer satisfaction, the user experience. I've seen when we've put these in that improves and increases substantially. Okay, so we have a happier support team because the experience is a lot better. The interactions between business and IT are a lot better, and the employee satisfaction is a lot better. So I kind of use that. I use the customer satisfaction. That's a really good one, and I think that NPS type scenario, if even in an IT sense, when they can't choose a different IT, you can still use a version of NPS to get to a customer satisfaction score. So those are the ones that I tend to use. They're kind of lagging indicators. And the other one about maturity, it's not really a process. So I'm sure that you can measure the maturity based on how much you do, whether you've got a team there, and do that from a maturity perspective. But I don't think there's an official maturity matrix as far as design thinking is concerned. Khalil, I don't know if you know.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, so John was talking about the outcome of design thinking, right? So there's lots of metrics you can find out there in terms, especially around customer satisfaction and user experience. But this is actually a good question, because within the design thinking kind of framework, measuring design thinking is quite a challenge, because there's so many things there's so many moving parts, and that's actually a challenge that's being discussed in the community today, to be honest. So good question, and I don't have the answer for that. I don't know how to measure that framework inside of it.
I guess if it's external, if it's provider of technology, then it could be measured by how many of your customers are using your technology in comparison to your competitors, right? And if you still remain in business, that would be the ultimate measure. So talk about, you know, technologies like Zoom or Cisco WebEx or, you know, whatever. So Zoom's doing well, we're using it, you know, there's good design thinking in there. But anyway, look, thank you so much to John, Halil, Surinder, and Dev, who've also contributed for mentors. Thank you to all of you I see there's a young child waving at us, so thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you on tomorrow and next week's sessions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.